Hello, friends of Riverbend United Church, and welcome to worship this morning on this Labor Day weekend, Sunday morning, or whichever day you are watching this. We are an affirming congregation of the United Church of Canada here in Edmonton, Alberta, which means no matter what, you are welcome. We're also a treaty people, and we remember that we live and worship and work and serve on Treaty 6 lands. May we honor those who have come before with all that we do. I'm happy to be back with you after a 3-week holiday staycation, and I'm grateful to Joel Fleck and David Faber for leading our worship services, along with the musicians who helped them. As we enter into the fall coming up, we are working on what it might mean for us to come back together for in-person worship for those who are not of the vulnerable population. We want to be sure you are cared for too. Matthew Schoenhardt is going to lead us through an announcement about our processes in this COVID situation. Let's listen to Matthew.
Hi, my name is Matthew Schoenhardt, and I'm speaking today both as lease manager and the reopening team lead for Riverbend United Church. I have two things to talk about today. The first is return to worship in the sanctuary and how we're going to reopen the building for user groups. The first item is we've decided to push back our return to in-sanctuary worship from Sunday, September the 13th to Sunday, October the 4th. This is going to give us a little bit more time to practice the protocols for a safe return. We want to make sure those protocols are as solid as possible before our community comes back into the building. While October the 4th is our target date, this may change, and we'll keep you appraised of that in our weekly emails, as things in Edmonton might change and might force us to change our opening date. Now, returning to worship will look much the same, returning to worship in the sanctuary, I should say, will look much the same as promised in the What to Expect When You're Expecting to Worship in the Sanctuary. If you haven't seen that video, you can go to Riverbend's YouTube channel and have a watch of it. The only difference will be that everyone must wear a mask, and this is a City of Edmonton bylaw, and it's really to keep everybody around us safe. We're hoping you can bring your own reusable mask, but if you can't, we'll provide a single-use mask at the door. You're going to be required to register online or by calling the office ahead of time, and the reason for that is twofold. First, with social distancing, the number of people we can fit in the sanctuary is limited, and second, we need to track all the people who come and go out of the building. Finally, I'd like to make a big shout out to Don Tren and E2 who hooked us up with this fantastic fogging machine. It kind of looked like a Ghostbuster, and it kills viruses. This is going to make sanitation in the building both faster, cheaper, and much more effective. And so with returning to worship in the sanctuary, I need to make two very clear points. Just because we can return to worship in the sanctuary doesn't mean you personally should come back to the sanctuary. We are taking all the measures to ensure safety. However, that doesn't mean worshiping in the building will be risk-free. Safety protocols are all about reducing transmissions. They are not perfect, and you can still get exposed to COVID if you come in the building. If you're at risk for adverse COVID conditions, or at risk for COVID outcomes, or have household, family, or friends with whom you are in regular physical contact who are in high-risk groups, please strongly consider to continue to worship remotely. And that's the second point. Just because we're returning to in-sanctuary worship does not mean we're canceling remote worship. Remote worship will still continue throughout COVID and quite possibly beyond. In fact, the spiritual formation team, the tech team are even working on how to do this live. So COVID's going to be here for a while, and we're going to continue to provide safe places for worship for everyone. The second item on my agenda is talking about how we're going to be reopening the building, not just reopening for worship in the sanctuary. This week we had clear direction from the board of how we're going to return for our user groups and for renters. On the renters, E2 started school this week. E2 will continue to lose their exclusive basement space and the upstairs meeting rooms. Their safety protocol, which is about 15 to 20 pages long, is based off the strict protocols set out by the province and the Ministry of Education. And you know what? It's pretty comprehensive. The second renter group we're going to be allowing to return is elite dance kids. They're going to return to the regular evening to basement use. I've reviewed their safety plan. It is excellent, and I will be auditing its execution and implementation to make sure they're actually doing what they said they are going to do. And the final and third rental group will be the Ghanaians. The Ghanaians will be allowed to return to worship in our sanctuary shortly after we have. And what we're going to do is we're going to lend them our processes and teach it to them, so they can also worship safely in the sanctuary. All other rentals and user groups, external user groups, will be considered in January 2021. For internal user groups like Wednesday Walkers, Weekend, Yoga, Crafts, Bells, Choir, we can all return to the building. However, it's not going to be like before. You can't simply just show up or call Jackie to get a room. Alberta's Health Services requires us to have documented safety plans and to be able to demonstrate adherence to those plans. The return team will work with internal user groups to ensure safety protocols are present and in force. All users will need to ensure social distancing. You're going to need to wear masks. You'll need to take attendance during the events, wipe down all high-touch surfaces like doorknobs and light switches, and then use the fogging sanitizer after every event. This is required not just to comply with Alberta Health Services directions to keep us safe, but to make sure that the event attendees and those who are in the building afterwards will also be safe. To conclude, our building is not going to be open like it was last February, but it's not going to be closed like it was in April. Following the safety protocols will reduce the risk of COVID exposure for everybody in the building and make it safer for us to start returning to the building. I say the building, not the church, because the church isn't a building. The church is our community of faith, and for that, the church will never be closed. Thank you.
I'm reading from Matthew 18. If a member of the church sins against you, go and point out the fault when the two of you are alone. That sounds like fun. If the member listens to you, you have regained that one. But if you are not listened to, take one or two others along with you, so that every word may be confirmed by the evidence of 2 or 3 witnesses. Jesus goes on, if the member refuses to listen to them, tell it to the church. And if the offender refuses to listen even to the church, Let such a one be to you as a Gentile and a tax collector. Truly I tell you, this is the part that goes zing through my system. Truly I tell you, whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, and whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. He goes on. Again, truly I tell you, if two of you agree on earth about anything you ask, it will be done for you by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, I am there among them. Those are the words of Jesus from the Gospel of Matthew. I'm curious to know if you ever argue with the scriptures. I confess, I do it often, but there's a whole rabbinic tradition of arguing with the scriptures, fighting with God, wrestling. Do you remember Jacob wrestled with the angel? It's not foreign to us humans on our spiritual journey to wrestle with the depths that call us. Perhaps that might be, I believe anyway, because when the depths call us, they want something of our lives that we thought were ours, but really aren't. And so we wrestle with God. So I often wrestle with the scriptures. I have been this summer, during these COVID days, wrestling with the famous line, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am also. It's a beautiful line. Many people know it who follow Jesus. And yet, in these COVID days, I have been fighting with it because we can't gather. We can't gather physically. So is Jesus still with us as we worship on our own, in our own homes and in our yards or decks or kitchens or living rooms or trails or boats or wherever it is that we are when we worship on our own? Is he with us? Now, of course, I know the answer is yes, but darn it, that sentence from Matthew kept niggling at me. So let's look at it. Let's look at this passage, because there are several things in it that I find to be very rich for us, for our spiritual journeys, for these COVID days. First of all, it's in the context of people arguing in the community of faith, in the church. The people are arguing. And so Jesus says, hey, if somebody's mad at you, go to them. Take someone with you. And it matters that you go to them, because whatever you bind up in closedness on earth is bound up in heaven for eternity. And whatever you loose in openness on earth is loosed for eternity in heaven. Those are some pretty high stakes, it seems to me. So who of any of us would want a dispute with another to be rippling for eons in closed tightness? I don't think any of us would wish for that. And so Jesus is calling us to make amends, to go to someone who we feel has wronged us. It's always perspective, right? Go to them and set it right. Do whatever you can to set it right. We're not responsible if they don't listen to us or accept an apology or want to come to terms with the disagreement. We can't be responsible for the other's actions, but we sure are responsible for our own. And so he's calling us, if you have a dispute, go try your best to settle it, because what you do now on earth ripples for eons. Those are pretty high stakes. And it's in that context eventually that he gets around to saying, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am also. Beautiful. I don't think he means physically gathered. When in Jesus' teachings and life does the physical surface world of this earth take precedence over the spiritual reality and the love of God that we all abide in each moment? So I believe it's very possible that he means that we are gathered in his name when we are giving our heart to the way of love through our words, our actions, our deeds, our beingness with one another and on our own throughout our moments of our days, of our lives, when we are giving us to the way of love. There he is. In he goes. In love goes through the tiniest cracks in our hearts. No matter how hard-hearted or stubborn or foolish we are, if there's just the tiniest crack, boom, in he goes. Wherever we are gathered, in the way of love, in the name of the Christ, in the spirit of goodness and justice and compassion and gentleness and truth, wherever we are gathered up in the same frequency, the same heartbeat, no matter how far we are physically from one another, even dispersed throughout the neighborhood or throughout the city or throughout this world, even dispersed physically, still in the unseen, we are gathered up when we are being love, being openness. It's beautiful, really. So if you are not able to come into the church when we gather for in-person worship, whenever that is in some weeks, don't despair, because you are gathered up with us. We are all gathered up together in the spirit of the Christ, in the love of God, through the heartbeat that abides in the core of everything of life. We are all gathered together, and there he is also. These are extraordinary days, and we are called to respond in extraordinary ways. How shall we respond? What shall we do with these COVID days and this COVID situations? It's like a cuss word, isn't it? A new cuss word? This COVID thing. Sorry, I just now thought of that. We know that complaining doesn't help. Wishing it were different doesn't help. It is as it is, and our first job is to accept it as it is, and within it, within the things we cannot change, still to be open-hearted and walk as children of love and faith. Whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Who amongst us wants our complaining to ripple through the eons? So even mid-sentence, if we catch ourselves complaining about these COVID days, this COVID situation, mid-sentence of complaint, as soon as we see it, just stop. There's not a single ounce of goodness to be gained by complaining. It's the way of faith to let loose the things that bind us and let our lives be loosed in heaven. I don't actually know what that means, but I have a sense. I have a sense of what it means for our mundane daily actions and words to ripple through eternity. Pretty high stakes. In these extraordinary days, what if we are to expect the extraordinary? Respond extraordinarily by not ever complaining or stopping when we catch ourselves, but also to expect the extraordinary. What is it that in this moment can be made new that never has been before? There's a woman who wrote a piece, an essay, an opinion, op-ed piece for CNN.com. And I want to close with her words here about these extraordinary days and its extraordinary invitation and call upon us and our lives. Her name is Tess Taylor. She's a poet and an author, and she reflects on this past summer that almost wasn't. It was so different than anything any of us would have ever imagined. For her, Tess Taylor, she had a massive, grandiose book tour planned throughout Europe. And of course, it got waylaid. Amongst other things, all of us have plans that have been waylaid in these COVID days. So she says this about that. The words of Tess Taylor, quote, "I want to be clear, this is a hard, sad, heartbreaking time. We could each write tomes about our fury. We could each carry enormous grief. When I can be, I'm also fascinated by what this moment has made possible. What smaller forms of joy and resilience are possible as a counterweight. And I'm also interested in what these long months have brought. Some days," she says, "I just hope we don't lose our jobs, our health, or our minds. But other days, I hope we can rebuild a more beautiful, just, and daring world when we have the chance. I wonder, what can repair us? What should we hope for? What world will we want back?" Those are the words of Tess Taylor, poet, writer, mom, wife. I would like to know what has touched you in these COVID days, in this summer that is now over, coming to the end of it, officially this weekend, I believe. Was there anything, just one little thing that touched you in these COVID days, in this COVID summer? I would like to know about it. Would you send it to me? Send me what touched you. Valerie at riverbendunited.org. In this new world, in this new kind of summer, was there anything beautiful that you saw? Was it a poem, a drawing, a billboard, a sunset, a photo someone shared, or a quote? Something your grandchild did, or maybe an orb weaver's masterpiece? Was it a bird feeding young? Or perhaps you were fortunate, as I was this summer, to actually catch a baby bird's first flight out of the nest because you slowed down enough for once. Were you touched by a particularly lollygagging conversation with an old friend that unearthed new ground between you? Will you send me what touched you this summer? Just something, anything that you found beautiful right in the midst of this new, crazy kind of world we are in. Let's go out into this week listening for the extraordinary that rises through the unique challenges of these COVID days. And let's respond in an extraordinary love that recognizes that every moment loosed here upon earth is loosed through eternity, and trusting that we are all gathered up in the Spirit and that He is with us. Amen. And now we're going to shift gears a bit, because part of the ways we respond to the grace and the love of Christ and being community together in faith is to share our gifts. And my friends, we have been so generous together in these COVID days. This touches my heart. Let's listen to Matthew Schoenhardt's finance update of our church. And then after he speaks, we will sing our final hymn, which is a new offering from the choir, The Lord's My Shepherd. It's beautiful. And then the benediction will be on the screen. So let's listen to Matthew, and then we will go in peace. Amen.
Hello friends, my name is Matthew Schoenhardt. I'm speaking to you today as the Interim Finance Chair of Riverbend United Church. I'd like to give you a quick update as to our financial position. When we last spoke in the spring, there was a substantial amount of risk in the air, so much so that, laying off staff was a possibility. And knowing the rough waters ahead, we asked the congregation, you, to maintain or increase your offerings, and you did. Thank you. During COVID, our offerings increased about 8% over budget, or about $10,000, and this is incredible. For those who've mailed in checks, switched or stayed on par, which is pre-authorized remittance, or hit the Donate Now button on the website, or emailed money to contact us at riverbend.org, I want to thank you for sharing your treasures with God. The board also, during COVID, pursued all applicable government grants that were made available, and that totaled about $15,000. But this source of funding kept us afloat. However, it is coming to an end. The next one is, the downside is that we've had to close the building. As a result, our rental income fell about 30% to budget, or about $15,000. As a result, we've been running a deficit to our budget of a few $1,000s a month. However, we took fairly drastic action. We cut or deferred all discretionary spending in our budget, which amounted to approximately $80,000, or 20% of our annual budget. This was draconian, and it was needed at the time. So these cuts and deferrals included our mortgage for about $15,000 and approximately $60,000 of maintenance and capital renewal. And now these last three items are deferrals. It means we don't save this money, we're just not spending it today. So just a quick recap, our offerings have increased by about $10,000. We've received about $15,000 of government programs, so we're up about $25,000. Our rents have decreased by $15,000, and we've put in pretty harsh austerity measures, which have cut about $80,000 out of the budget. Now, all of this combined, of course, we've missed our budget. However, it has resulted in us generating positive cash flow, and we've approximately doubled our cash position since COVID started. Back in May, I was counting the days to insolvency for our church, and I'm no longer doing that. So thank you very much for offering up your treasures to God. Now, this week we had a board meeting, and we had an eye to our reopening plan, and we did a fall forecast that shows we're actually going to have a cash surplus on this draconian budget of a few $1,000s every month. And given your strong response and our cash balance, while some churches are really hurting out there, we're actually in a position to open the taps just a little bit. And I want to stress just a little bit. So we'd like to spend some, less than a third of the $80,000 of deferred expenses. So this week the board authorized a release of about $25,000 of the planned capital budget to fund new front doors and a building condition assessment. The building condition assessment is really important because it's going to provide us a professional opinion on the magnitude and priority and when things in our building are going to start falling apart and when we'll need to fix them and how much they're going to cost. This will give us a proper capital budget expectation. Finally, the board also passed a motion to review our cash position in October to consider catching up on the deferred $15,000 of mortgage payments. So, just to conclude, our community of faith's response to our church's financial situation has been incredible. Thank you. We've increased our offerings, which is partially made up for the drop in rental revenue. When combined with spending cuts, deferrals, and government grants, we've managed to increase our cash position. This has allowed us to ease off the draconian budget and go to a mere austerity budget. This actually makes us the envy of most religious organizations in Canada. And thank you for stepping up. With your continued offerings, Riverbend United Church will get through this. Thank you.